Do you know how a play will end when you first began? Where does the initial impulse come from?
Well, for me, I'm a very associative and image-based thinker and writer, and so very often for me, the first thing that will come is an image that encapsulates the play and becomes the end of the play. And often I won't know what to do with it or what that is, but sometimes that becomes the kind of template. So often the ending is the first thing, and then I have to find out what the play is. You know, so for example, I have a play called Slow Falling Bird, which is set in an Australian detention centre in the desert. And I knew that I wanted to write something about the detention centres in the Australian desert, but that was very hard for me because it seemed as though the most clear approach would be journalistic. And I knew I had to do a lot of research, but I really hate journalistic sort of plays. So I was sort of sitting with that very uncomfortable tension. And one night I was falling asleep. I sort of woke up at about 4 a.m. and I had this really strong picture in my head of this sort of blackened half woman, half bird figure that was hung on a fence with claws like this, and she couldn't land and she couldn't fly, and she was suspended between earth and sky on this kind of wire. And then the phrase slow falling bird came into my mind, and I knew that that was my title and that was sort of the central image of the play. And I also had this little bit of language that came into my mind then, which was, I have no idea where it came from, but I saw that image and I heard this thing that said, "The day burns black, the night's a slow falling bird." And it was just there. And then, you know, it took me 2 years to write the play and a lot of research, but I still feel as though if you just heard those lines and saw that image, you would know that it was that play. So
very interesting.
So but then the hard work is actually writing the play and getting back to that, if you ever do even.
Well, so the initial inspiration may come from actually a kind of liminal space too, right? So halfway between waking and sleeping, a dream world. And the scenario you describe is something suspended, literally, between two worlds.
Exactly.
You seem to like to mash things up, have collisions, and the tagline I think that goes with Trojan Barbie is a car crash encounter with Euripides.
Yes, yes.
Would you tease that out a little bit more? What is it about the mashup, the collision?
Yes.
And who's in that car that crashes when you're talking about Trojan Barbie?
Yeah. Well, I would have to say that we probably are. You know, feeling nice and safe in the leather seats with the windshield there until. So I think I'll talk specifically about Trojan Barbie in relation to this question. This place first started life as a commission from the University of San Francisco.
UC San Francisco?
No, USF, University of San Francisco, a small Jesuit university, where I was asked to write an adaptation of the Trojan Women. Never done an adaptation before, had no idea how to do it. But it really got me thinking about adaptation. What is adaptation? And I knew that what I didn't want to do was to just modernise Euripides, because one, I think that's boring, and two, it's not very imaginative to say that something that existed then is going to directly signal its relevance if we just put people in sneakers, you know.
Right.
I thought, what is an adaptation? And I started thinking about this idea of dialogue. How can I make a dialogue between something that speaks in a really different voice to the voice we speak in now? So I was sort of thinking about the relationship between our time and Euripides' time, and I'm a huge Euripides fan. He's my favourite of the Greek writers. I just adore him, and I love the fact that he tends to write from marginal voices. You know, he writes from the viewpoint of women and slaves often, which is why he didn't win a whole lot of prizes. But and then again, you know, an image came to me, and it took me quite a while to figure out what it meant. And I was just trolling through websites really late one night, insomniac, thinking, I'm going to fail, I can't write this play. And I came across a website for a doll hospital, you know, and the images of these smashed up dolls just looked so like images I've been looking at of broken bodies from war zones. And right there I thought, there's something about these two things that is going to speak to the past and the timeless present of war in a way, and it's going to have something modern and funny about it. What is that? So that was a first impulse. And then really my line of thought specifically, I mean, for me the smash up in Trojan Barbie is not to do with being trendy and postmodern and doing it for the sake of. It's very much about the specific question of how does the past repeat in the present. And one of the things that seems very characteristic of our time to me is that we are living in a lot of times at once. You know, so we can be here with our iPhones and our nice clothes, and we're watching wars on television where the people on the screen could have walked out of the Bible. You know, they could have walked out of BC time, you know, in terms of those robes or those sandals or the goats on the hills. Absolutely. Except there's an AK-47, you know. So I feel as though, in a way, the play is not inventing something. It's trying to respond to the shock of living in lots of different layers of time at once, you know. And then once I had this idea of the layers of time and this combined image of the broken body and the doll, I kind of had somewhere to go. But I really wanted to do something that addressed the distress that I feel about being a tourist of other people's wars, a compulsory tourist of other people's wars. You know, that it's a kind of pornography to sort of have to watch people being, you know, the terrible things that happen to people that I will never meet on a TV screen, to do with, you know, countries that I come from now, Australia and the States. And yet the disconnect is so touristic, and so my main character became a tourist.
And a voyeur at the same time.
Yes, and then this idea of the smash is also to do with it's never real till it happens to you, on some level. You know?
It's also one of the great titles of all time. Trojan Barbie is just a fabulous title. How did you come out with that?
Well, I have to credit my brilliant niece, Chella Williams, for that. When Chella was about 8, she's a very arty girl, and she's now 19, but when she was about 8, my mum and she and I were in Perth one day, and we'd taken Chella out for a special treat with Auntie and Grandma. And we'd been to a cafe, and I said, "Oh, what do you want to do now, Chella? Do you want to go and get an ice cream, or do you want to go and bounce on the bouncy castle?" And she said, "Well, Chrissy, I think I would like to go to an art gallery." Okay, so my mum and I looked at each other. Okay, so we went to an art gallery, and it was modern sculpture. So, you know, Polly's monologue in Trojan Barbie, those of you who haven't seen it, you'll recognise my niece in this first speech that one of the girls gives in the play. But we went to this exhibition. It was all just smashed up things on the walls and sort of hung pianos. And I saw Chella walking around, and then I saw this look that I knew was the look of the hungry artist. I saw her eyes narrow with sort of hate and jealousy as she was looking at these things, and I knew she was thinking, I could do that. I could do that. I could see how that's done. I could do that. And so she was just walking around looking at all these things in this very intense way. And eventually, you know, I got my way, and we had ice cream after all the art. And we were driving home in the car, and my mum and I were chatting, and then Chella piped up from the back seat, and she said, "You know, Chrissy, I could make my own sculpture just like those ones, only better." And I said, "Okay, Chella, how would you do it?" And she said, "Well, I have a lot of broken things, but mostly what I have is broken Barbie dolls." But you know, and then she basically invented the sculpture that is in the play. In the car going home, she said, "Daddy could get me some pink cardboard, and I would nail my dolls on it in the shape of a heart, and it would be sort of flat and sort of three-dimensional." And then she said, and I'd call it, like about 20 minutes later, because she was thinking through every step of the sculpture in the car, and then she said, "I'd call it Jurassic Barbie." So, and I just thought, my niece is a genius, I'm going to steal that. So, but that's why the play is dedicated to Chella.
A found mashup straight from your
I
niece.
know, that's right. Well, kids do that, right? I mean, it's not just postmodernists. Kids make things out of whatever's to hand, and I love that, and the kids in my play do as well.
And put things together. Now, so there was nothing about the 50th anniversary of the appearance of the Barbie doll that coincided with your world premiere last year.
Sheer luck.
Sheer luck?
Yeah,
well done.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Well done.
Yeah.
Is there, now clearly the image came from your niece, but is there more to Barbie? My class members are here. They know that I'm fond of
Barbie.
Going on about titles. Let's go a little deeper with the title of A Dollhouse, for example. We happen to be reading. Your play, by the way, is the final bookend to a course that begins with a dollhouse.
That's so great.
Finishing with Trojan Barbie.
That's so great.
How perfect is that? But,
yeah.
But what about Barbie.
Yeah.
Why Barbie?
Yeah. Well, I think in a way Barbie's the perfect accidental tourist. I mean, she's always getting these new jobs, you know. I think there might even be